life's greatest questions seem like a mystery? Well, we're probably going to talk about it here at Appalachian Liturgy. Important questions like, are you a Jedi or an Imperial? Is oatmeal actually a breakfast cereal? Is a Catholic weekday really called a ferial? Did you know that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterial? So join us as we have a little fun talking about thy kingdom come. Appalachian Liturgy.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of the Appalachian Liturgy podcast. I am Justin Stacy.
I'm Brooke Ashley.
And I'm Justin Bowling.
And today we have our friend Nate Thomas, who is apparently a fan favorite of our podcast, maybe the only viewer we have. I don't know.
I'm still waiting for my Appalachian Liturgy t-shirt to come.
Hey, I've been brainstorming that, actually. That's coming. It's going to happen. So, Nate, you are a pastor of Tazewell Christian and Cliffield Christian Church. Do you want to just tell us something briefly about that?
I'll try and be brief. You may have to cut me off. I filled in the pulpit here at Tazewell Christian Church in July of 2018. Their retiring pastor was going on a month's sabbatical, and they asked me to come back 2 weeks later. So I knew something was up. And I preached the 2 weeks after that. Had never been a pastor before. I'd been a youth pastor, an associate minister, had volunteered since I was like 18. And about 3 weeks after that, they asked me to come and meet with their search committee to come on board as their interim pastor. So I did that, started in October of 18, first time ever pastor in a church. And the next summer, the Cliffield Church asked me to come when their interim pastor, who was a college student, went on to seminary. And that's where we are today.
Great. All right. So Nate, thanks for joining us. I'm sure this is going to be a lively discussion. I hope we don't get each other in trouble, but we'll see.
Little mischief's always good.
Yeah. Some good trouble. So tonight we are focusing on the upcoming election. We wanted to talk a bit about Christian voting and just all of the malarkey, if one wants to quote a famous politician, that really goes into the hype and the social media craze and just the division that is going on, especially in the church. So I guess where do we want to start there?
I think we start by saying there's obviously only one way that Christians can vote. If you don't vote a certain way, you've clearly not been walking with Christ. And, obviously being silly, but I do think that's kind of going from what Brooke was saying earlier. That's probably one of the attitudes that we wanted to hope to address that seems to be a common attitude that kind of floats around in the church.
So I mean, as long as I can remember, this is the most acrimonious, I think, election season that I have experienced. The closest thing probably, and I can remember being shocked that this was happening. So I had a political sticker, I won't say which party it was, on the back of my van. It was the one and only time I'd put a political sticker. We'll never do that again.
What year?
Oh, no.
Come on. You can't give me the year. What color was it?
But one of my fellow church employees, we were on staff together, took a marker and defaced my sticker on my car. Wow. And I can remember there being this big shock about it, right? Because how dare somebody else do that? But I feel like kind of now that kind of stuff's happening and people are almost not surprised by it. You know, I mean, it was a big deal. It was a big controversy in the church that, one person had done that. And but I just don't think that people would be so outraged about it unless you were also pulling for that particular candidate,
It's kind of funny you say that too. I remember 2008 election. The Facebook was around then, and I remember everybody kind of like what I thought was freaking out on Facebook, and I took screenshots of it and like saved a Word document of everybody acting crazy. And then I kind of was reminded of that by my wife the other day, and I'm like, I'm gonna go look at that and see, like how crazy people were then. And then when I opened it up, I'm like, that actually seems tame compared to what you just see every day now. So it really, like, the amount of escalation is just insane.
A friend of mine who's a pastor here in our area, he had not a staff member, but a leader in the church posting political memes on Facebook that would say things like, you can't go to the poll and vote for this on Tuesday and come to church and sing "We Are One in the Family of God" on Sunday. And people in the church were going to the pastor and saying, how are we supposed to respect him? If he feels that way about us and doesn't want to discuss, he wants to dictate. It's caused a little bit of strife. And, the pastor, to his credit, has tried to correct the behavior. He's tried to give him the biblical models of leadership, Titus and Timothy. And I won't do that to you tonight. But I've never seen the nation so divided. I've voted since 1996, just to date myself a little bit. And I can remember even in 2000 when they had the controversy over the presidential election for 3 months. I don't remember seeing people being so angry. I mean, people are so angry now.
Yeah. So normally I will put up a political sign at the edge of my yard. I did in 2016. This year I chose not to. And mostly because of the environment that we're in. I felt like that my yard and possibly my neighbor's yard, because we have a connected driveway, would get vandalized if I did. So I decided it's best just not to have anything up this year. It sucks because I do like being vocal with my political leanings.
No,
it's just
really?
not. Yeah, yeah. But it's really not safe at this point to even vocalize it.
I was talking to my grandmother today on the drive from Virginia back to Tennessee, and we were talking about the election, and our family is very divided on, and some are much more vocal than others. And she was talking about how she just never, until the last couple elections, you didn't really talk about who you voted for. Like, she said, nobody would have thought to ask you, well, who did you vote for? Or who you voted, people voted, and that was that. And whoever it was that secrecy. It was, you went in, you pulled the lever behind the curtain, and you left. And she said, now, everybody wants to announce to their neighbor. She said, I feel like when we went and voted, people were coming out of the voting booth. They voted early a couple weeks ago, and she was like, they would vote, I voted for, and she's like, who cares who you voted for? Just vote and go on. But it was interesting to get her perspective a little bit on, what's happening.
I think that we have adopted our American identities by politics now, by our political parties, more so than even our Christian identity. Like, we identify women, and I say that I struggle with this too. I have for years. Like, when someone asks me, who I am or whatever, I want to say I'm such and such ideology, or I'm such and such, I vote such and such way. It's the first thing that comes to mind. And it's because we are being groomed, and I think a lot by the media, we are being groomed to believe that the most important thing in your life is going to be the way you vote and how you vote and your political leaning. And then whoever's on the opposite side of that, that's your enemy. And it's just such a dangerous place to be. And recently I went in my Facebook and I changed my profile to basically take away the politics stuff, because I felt like I needed to do it. I needed to flush that stuff down the drain, because that's not my. What was that?
Is your news feed empty now?
No, I mean, I still share political stuff, obviously, but I'm just saying, like, my profile, like when you go to my profile, the about section, I had some political stuff there and I took it out. I want to identify myself as a Christian first.
Right.
First and foremost. And then wherever politics falls beyond that, it is where it falls. But Christian first, family second. Mm-hmm. And then whatever label we want to put on each other beyond that is, I guess, okay. But we should not be so beholden to these labels.
So there's a politician running for a Senate seat in Kentucky. have you all seen her ads? And she says,
Mhm.
and watching her ads, I don't know what political party she is. And she says, God first, family second, country third, and she never talks about her political. I'm assuming I know which way she's doing because who she's running against. But I thought how refreshing
Yeah.
that is, so I don't know. I think as a clergy person, as a person who holds leadership positions, even beyond the local church, I try to be really careful that I don't show my political cards, because one, I take the responsibility very seriously that and because I know that I'm a clergy person, that some people take what I say as like straight from God, which it's not, by the way. But anyway, and I'm afraid they'll vote that way because their clergy person is voting that way. But I also, even within the church, if I let my political ideologies know, it weakens my voice on a lot of areas. And, I'm called to preach the gospel, not a political party, which is hard sometimes.
And I think you made a good point there too, Justin. Like, you're talking about putting politics like on such a high pedestal. Like, I feel like we've talked about this before, but like, it's easy to make an idol out of something like politics, to where we put it as that is our identity type thing. Like, it's become more Christianity has become more and more, like, not as important in America. We've kind of had to put our faith in something else, and the church has followed suit with those who are, not really just putting their faith in politics. We've kind of done the same.
Yep.
So I'm teaching a Sunday school class right now, and we're going through the 10 Commandments, and we talked about this with the idol, and we've talked about it with a couple other things too. And we talked about the fact that we were really uncomfortable when athletes would say things like, after winning a game, oh, God was with me, and we were one. He was there with us, and we felt that was uncomfortable. So I just said, well, how do you feel in American politics when the person who wins the election says, oh, God was with us? And it was crickets, because the thought was, well, God wouldn't be involved in a ball game, right? And I just wonder how often folks think either, God is with us or God is not with us, depending on if they won their political race. I mean,
yeah.
I think as Americans, we think that God is super involved in our politics, and I don't know.
Yeah, I think one of the things about America is we believe that democracy, or the democratic republic that we live in, is divinely inspired, or is a godly institution. It's not. Like, this is a man-made institution that it's the best we have. I believe that a democratic republic, or maybe even a democracy, is the best government that we could have from our fallen human level. But that's not what the kingdom of God's going to look like. I don't. It's going to be a kingdom, and so I think that we kind of cloud our vision of what maybe even the kingdom of God is going to look like, because we probably think it's going to look like America.
Yeah.
I think there's a danger too. I hope I didn't interrupt anybody. There's a danger too for pastors, and I know it more now, having been a senior pastor for just a little while. Your words carry more weight. Even, I don't know what Bowling or Justin, Stacy, what you guys do in your churches, but taking a public stance like you do on the podcast makes you public figure Christians. I don't care what your title is in the church. I know Brooke is in the clergy just from listening to her talk. And, I am. Your words have weight. If I go to a football game and show myself booing or acting up, it affects my witness. If I get behind the pulpit and use God's word to push a political agenda, whatever that agenda is, it doesn't weaken God's word. It weakens the message that God allows me to deliver. It doesn't nothing weakens God's word, but there's a weight to leadership. People listen to what you say, and it's given, and then it has to be earned when you're in a pastoral position.
That's why I don't have any Christian bumper stickers on my car.
Yeah, because I like to speed and I don't want him to say anything to me.
Because, you know, if I cut you off, I don't want you to think that I'm less of a Christian because I just cut you off.
Oh,
So that brings up the question, how do Christians vote?
Yeah,
Yeah.
surely there's one, like Christians are in total agreement on how they vote, and they've always been, and all that fun stuff.
so
Wasn't
Yeah.
Jesus a Republican?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what people say.
that's what most people
I'll
say.
get in trouble. So I'm just gonna say,
So yeah, I think we're going to turn to Phil Vischer to help us with this. He released a few videos over the past couple of weeks. The first one was titled "Why Do White Christians Vote Republican and Black Christians Vote Democrat?" So if anyone don't know who Phil Vischer is, you're living under a rock. But he was creator of
Under a
VeggieTales.
tomato.
Under a tomato. Bob the Tomato. Actually, I did not watch VeggieTales when I was younger, and my sister didn't either. So I guess I was living under a rock. But I found out who Phil Vischer was, probably 10 years ago, and I've been following her ever since. So him and Skye Jethani and Christian Taylor, they do a podcast called The Holy Post, and it is amazing content. I would strongly recommend it, and they have helped me tremendously through my questioning period of my faith. So yeah, I'm going to post all the links, but yeah, I would suggest follow them because that was the idea of why I wanted to do a podcast, was because of them. Anywho, so we're going to talk about these videos. So the first one is basically on Christian voting. So it's crazy that there's such division in white evangelical realm versus the black Protestant realm. Also, it's kind of funny that there is no evangelical word for black Protestants.
right.
Now the Pew studies is kind of the ones that give these labels. So, it's not necessarily theological labels. These are poll labels. So you've got 96% of black Protestants that voted Democrat in 2016. And 81% of white evangelicals voted Republican. Well, I guess that was Hillary and Trump specifically. I don't know. I don't remember if he said Republican, Democrat. I think he said Hillary and Trump, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. So there's such a huge division here, and I think that is the case for Democrat, Republican as well. Like a huge majority of black voters, of black Christian voters, vote Democrat, and a huge majority of white evangelical voters vote Republican. So any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that's enough of a stat by itself that should give us pause. Anybody who thinks that, this is clearly the choice for Christians. Like, you have divergent groups that you would have a hard time saying are not theologically sincere in their walk with Christ and are voting sincerely, that vote total opposite of each other. Like, to me, should be, case closed. Maybe I need to not feel like that there's one blatantly obvious choice that this could go. Maybe we're coming at it from a couple different angles for some reason or another, even if I don't understand what that is. That's at least my take from it. Like, because I feel like you can't say that these whole groups of Christians are just insincere in the way they're voting.
So I grew up in a tradition where there was one issue that you voted on, and that was abortion. It didn't really matter what the other categories were. And so, I grew up thinking there was only one party that you could, if you were a God-fearing person, that you could vote for. But I also wasn't presented with statistics like this, and I think that we tend to surround ourselves with like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we go to church with people who look like us, who believe like us, and we don't ask for divergent opinions, in church. And so I think with everybody that attends a certain church or whatever, and they all have the same opinion, I think you just assume that everybody with that label has that opinion.
Yeah. So I guess the question, do you all do you think it is still somewhat of an ignorance of these stats issue, or is it we really don't care about these stats and, we're going to stay within our bubbles? And
You have
if
a lot
you're
of-
not, what was that, Nate?
I'm sorry, I said you do have a lot of percentage of that.
Yeah. So, I don't know that stats are going to necessarily help the situation, unfortunately.
No, I do think though, I mean, that it's not like it says 47% vote this way. I mean, 96%.
Huge percentages.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
now,
I don't think it's. Oh, go ahead.
what would make this stronger for me is if we had a white Protestant label.
And I was going to bring that up. So it doesn't include mainline. So that's excluding us two, Brooke and myself. And it doesn't include Catholic. So that excludes bowling. So Nate, you're the only one in this probably stat. and so
I did dig up some Pew research from the 2012 election that had more granular breakdowns than that. And it does kind of go, I mean, if you're probably a betting person, it's probably about how you were betting it would go too, to where you see, the historically black, like you said, are the most widely Democratic, 96, 95%, depending on which individual denomination you're talking about. The mainline churches fall more towards the U.S. average, with churches like the Episcopal and United Church of Christ being more Democratic, and then churches looks like Anglican is actually listed specifically here, and then the United Methodists are a little bit more Republican.
Oh.
And then Catholic basically matches the U.S. population as a whole, and then, like you said, evangelical is a lot more. So it's all across the spectrum is really what you see.
And I would, as a Methodist, I would think that, because there's even a debate in the Methodist Church of whether or not we're mainline or evangelical. So
that's interesting.
because I think used to be that Methodist was considered evangelical. I mean, for Pete's sakes, the Great Awakening,
Right.
But I think you could make the argument now that the Methodist Church has slipped into that mainline category.
I didn't realize it was a bait. Sorry, I classified you incorrectly.
It's all good.
I think a lot of Christians, a lot of churches is breaking away from the evangelical title just because of how closely related it is, specifically to right-wing politics and the Republican Party. So they're trying to back away from it.
Well, what Brooke was saying, though, is still true. You have the congregation where I am, and I think a lot of our churches in general are generally 55 and above. There are younger pockets in churches, but we're still an older region. Our people they've become single issue voters.
Mm-hmm.
And that issue, to piggyback off what Brooke said, is a lot of times abortion. And I'll keep those thoughts to myself right now.
Yeah, we have another video we're going to go over that. But on the point of single issue voting, I do wonder if it's a little bit different in our area, just because I knew a lot of people, a lot of Christians before, even 2008 with Obama, but that voted Democrat, that had no problem voting for a Democrat that, has a platform of keeping abortion right. And then after 4 years of Obama, and there was this push for clean energy, that the single issue they end up voting on was coal, and it wasn't abortion. So I wonder if our area is just a little bit different in that coal is actually the single issue that most people votes on around here. Maybe abortion just takes a little bit of a backseat.
There might be some.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, I think there might be some truth to that, but I think there's also some truth to the area part at the very least. It's even touched on a little bit in, I think, the same video about like the idea of, the big sort of America, we've kind of sorted ourselves into these groups that already sort of agree with each other. And then we just kind of latch onto that even more so and wind up having to feel like we agree with everything too.
Mhm.
So we might agree with one particular point that kind of brings us together, but then it becomes like no diversity of thought, and it's just that's all you ever hear.
Yeah, so basically before the 60s and 70s there used to be liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats, and so there was a mix. There wasn't an ideology with the parties, and then the big sort, and the Southern strategy and all of that kind of changed the dynamics of the party, and so now it's really the Republican Party is primarily a Southern thing and primarily a conservative thing. And the Democratic Party, I would say, is more of coastal now and liberal. So yeah, that didn't used to happen.
You used to hear people talk about being a fiscal conservative, right? But you don't even hear that really much anymore. I mean, every now and then in some of our local elections, I think you'll hear that. But and you used to hear people talk about being a moderate, and it used to be that when you had at least in my memories, we had the primaries, you had a lot of the polarizing kind of thing. But once you got to the general election, people tried to act like they were a moderate, right? Yep. And we've lost that now.
Yep.
I mean, so
the fringes, the extreme right, the Tea Party side, and the extreme left, the fanatics, have taken over the visibility of the two main parties. And I don't believe that's an accurate reflection of about 50% of the population, but I do believe it's the most visible and the most vocal, like the squeaky wheel that gets the attention.
I also think that's where the most funding comes from.
I do too.
Well, when you're passionate about something, your money follows, right? But I do think, I mean, and I think this is just a word of caution about whether it's politics or the color of the carpet in the church. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But the people who have the strongest opinions are always the loudest.
You're right.
They're always the loudest.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the main takeaway, one for me from Phil's first video, was that there is such a huge contrast between Black Christians and white Christians when it comes to voting. So we really need to be careful to not label people that vote different than us based on Christian values as just not being a Christian or being a terrible Christian, or there's some terrible names that we call other voters. So I think that's a good takeaway from that first video. So we've touched on this a couple of times now. So let's go ahead and dive into it. The second video was titled "What About Abortion? Should this one issue determine how Christians vote?" So I found this video very interesting because I guess I agreed with most of it. But I am curious. I know, Bowling, you definitely would fall into the pro-life voter. How did you feel about this video?
Throw me out in front, I guess. But
yeah.
Well, I'm going to transition from the last topic too, real quick. But just I like what you said. Like, it should make you pause. It might not solve any problems you may have, but it should make you question why somebody might vote differently. And that's what I think this video starts to do. Is if you think that you have to vote a Republican because of the pro-life issue, it gives you reasons why somebody may not feel that that's the case. And I think it gives good reasons. One being practicality, in that if your goal is to overturn Roe versus Wade, there's a couple of problems there. One being that it doesn't, even if everything went perfectly and best case scenario, Roe versus Wade gets overturned, that you're looking at maybe a 10% reduction in abortions. It doesn't make abortion illegal. It just reverts it back to the states. It stops it from having to be legal. That's a big difference. And that's when we kind of forget when we start getting wrapped up into this. And while I think that's great and an amazing goal to have in mind, it's the point that he makes is that we can actually maybe make a bigger difference even in the current situation at the state level, which does kind of make you pause and think, maybe this shouldn't be the only thing that I'm worried about if it doesn't look like whoever's in office is, they're going to make the be all end all on what the abortion rate is. It looks like it basically makes no difference based on the stats that Skye gave. and B, that I can actually make an even bigger difference on the issue that I think is very important somewhere else. And so I do think that's a good, crash course into why somebody might not feel like you have to only vote on that one issue.
Yeah. I thought it was really interesting because I just didn't know the dynamics of the court makeup between 1973 and now. I assumed it was more balanced, but it seems like there have been majority conservative courts at many spans during that time. There's been 11 Republican justices, 4 Democratic,
12 and 4 now.
Just 12 and 4, right? And what was it? What was the stat? 49 out of 50 times.
50 years.
Mm-hmm.
That they've upheld cases for abortion or Roe v. Wade that's related or whatever, and it's been conservative courts to do it. So we can't, you can't just say that if we get our conservative justices, they're going to overturn it, because there's a very good chance they're not going to.
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, when the week after the election, a lady in the church I was in that Wednesday night said, well, we're going to have a Republican in office. They're going to finally overturn Roe v. Wade. And I asked her, I said, we've had Republicans in office a lot since I was born, and Roe v. Wade's existed the whole time. What makes you think it's going away? Well, because I know it is. And I said, no, we've had the House, the Senate, for multiple times. It's not going anywhere. Because I never thought she was going to speak to me again. She was just so upset. But I think we're blinded sometimes by what we personally think versus public policy.
Yeah. And I think it shows that you can view that as a laudable goal, but you also have to kind of put it in perspective on what its actual effect is too, which does make a difference, or could make a difference depending on how somebody may interpret that. So I think that should be kind of somebody's first step into realizing why somebody may not, even coming from the same background, same theological viewpoint as you, may have a different, interpretation of what that means for their vote.
Well, I just want to ask too, I don't like the term pro-abortion. I've met a lot of people in my life, and all of us have. Have you ever met anyone who's encouraging people to go get abortions and is taking them back and forth and paying for them, and you need to get pregnant so you can get an abortion? There's no such thing as that person.
You can find a random article on a couple random articles on some very, very extreme sites. But for the most part, that was also brought up in that same video. Everybody, 75 to 80% of the country, I think it said, believes that abortions should be illegal with some exceptions type thing. There should be some strict regulations on it, which is basically what you're saying. Most people don't want that.
Right.
So having had the opportunity to counsel a lot of women facing this decision, what I have always been struck by is how a family's viewpoint can change on abortion when they are faced with it straight in the face.
Mm-hmm.
They may be your pro-life, anti-abortion card carrying, sign holding people, and then when this happens usually it's to young women, high school age women or whatever, all of a sudden when they're faced with that reality and a person that they know is facing that choice, they temper their language a little bit. They change, they may change their position. So I think that as the church, we do a lot of harm when we scream and rail against abortion. And I think I've shared with you all this before, but my favorite thing to see, I'm being very facetious here, is when churches put out little white crosses in their yards to talk about how many babies were aborted that year. That does nothing to bring people to Christ. It pushes people farther away, and I think when I was watching this video, I think the thing that struck me the most was talking about how early on, when our founding fathers were still alive, they talked about how that society had no regard for the unborn.
Yeah.
And I just sat there and listened to that, and I thought, oh my gosh. I mean, y'all know of us in the church, we are stuck looking back in the past. I mean, we're rear view driven people. It's always the glory days are behind us. And I think that we forget how we've become a much more moral society.
Yeah,
than
that
here.
that was one of the things that struck me too. It's like you do think, I think us Christian Americans, we think that let's look back 100 years and see a much more moral society when it comes to the unborn, but we've never had that morality, that moral conscience, and we're just getting it. And I think it's because of technology that we're getting it. So and yeah, I think that your law can reflect that. One of the questions I've always had is, what do we really want when it comes to abortion? Do we want a net zero, or as close to zero as possible, or do we want moral laws? Because I don't know that you get it both. And if you can only choose one, which do you choose? Because I think if you side on just the moral law, then the reasoning that you're voting then is not to get to zero. It's to serve your own conscience. And now there might be a time where we can have both. I just don't see it anytime soon. And there is, based on the stats, it seems as though with abortion legal, we are trending lower and lower every year in any administration, if it's Republican or Democrat. And I thought one of the things Skye brought up was that the lowest it's dropped was the Obama administration.
Yeah.
And, I think your increase of healthcare and your sex education and your free birth control and all those things, that's a big help, I think. And then also he brought up that the Planned Parenthood had the most taxpayer funding in the Trump administration in 2019. So I thought
that was an interesting point too.
Those were interesting stats
I was
because,
shocked by that.
yeah.
And I do think, like, you don't have to, I'm not saying you have to buy his argument wholesale 100%. I think there are some things somebody could counter with and say something about, like, what is the Mexico City policy, the executive order that usually switches back and forth between administrations, and depending on the party that's in place, that determines like funding for abortions in like NGOs, other countries, when they're helping and stuff. And that is 100% changed, as soon as somebody takes office. That could be something somebody could counter with. But I do think it's important, and there's a lot of good points there, to where if you see somebody saying, well, I feel like I can vote, on other issues, because I don't actually think that this is, controlled 100% by the party of who's in office. And I think that video should be enough to let somebody see where somebody might be coming from if they decide to go a different way.
Yeah.
Well, and I thought that he made a great point when he talked about the fact that local politics and local organizations have more of an impact on the rate of abortions in an area than a national politics. And there is a political issue that I feel pretty strongly about in Virginia anyway. And I was really shocked to find this out, and I did it. It just happenstance. But of course, I'm a mom of girls. And so it came to my attention that when my girls were in high school in the state of Virginia, they had the right to be taken from school, to have an abortion and brought back to school without a parent's notification. But I couldn't send a Benadryl to school without a doctor's note. And so I really pushed hard on that. And what happens in the state of Virginia is, as soon as a girl becomes pregnant, they actually become emancipated.
Oh, wow.
And so they can make their own decisions, and they don't have to inform the parents about anything pregnancy related. But then as soon as the pregnancy is terminated, they are no longer emancipated. So, when people talk about this on a political level, there are ways that I think that we can work to help the fallout, if you will, the damage that is caused by that. But I don't know that it's a national, that I need to vote for party lines because of one issue.
And I think other practical things that we can support to do is increase funding for adoptions. Yes. I think that's a big help. And, I think the church should be encouraging adoptions. So, I think that would be big. Obviously, access to healthcare. If we can increase and make healthcare better, that's going to help. One thing that I've always thought was a reason why, especially younger women, would want to have an abortion is the stigma that we create on having babies in the teenage years.
Mm.
And we Christians are bad to do it, especially, unwed mothers and things like that. There's such a negative stigma on I think that creates the environment that you would want to have an abortion.
So I think as the church, we tout being pro-life, but what we really are anti-abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of ways that we can be pro-life that we fail on, and I think that's one of them, Stacey. I think when we don't value the life of the mom and it helps support that, and we don't step in and try to support the family or become the family for that child that's being born. We push that young mom away. But I think that as the church, we fail at being pro-life throughout life. But we get stuck on being anti-abortion. And that's all I'll say about that.
Yep.
A really well-spoken point.
Really well spoken. So I guess that leads us into our final question. How should Christians vote? And that was the last, basically the last video that Phil went into was how should we vote? One Christian's Guide to Approaching the Voting Booth. So, how should we vote?
Prayerfully.
Yeah.
I've always thought, and I'm sure you all have heard this too, and I've always hoped that surely the things that unite us are greater than the things that divide us. And I am not sure in 2020 if that's still the case.
I agree.
Don't feel like it sometimes.
Well, I mean, I can remember voting in 1996 when President Clinton was running for re-election against Bob Dole on the Republican ticket. And I remember even at 18 years old thinking, well, I mean, I'm going to vote because, I was brought up that way, you vote.
Mm-hmm.
But if this guy wins, we're going to be fine. In 2004, when President Bush was running for re-election against John Kerry,
mm-hmm.
I thought, no matter who wins, we're going to be okay. And now you think, depending on who wins the election, whenever it ends, because I'm not sure it'll end on Tuesday, I'm not sure that the nation will be able to say, well, let's get back to business.
Mm-hmm.
That's my concern. And as a Christian, I want to vote. I hate the term vote your conscience, but vote your biblical standards. Okay.
Yeah.
You do research in God's word and you go from there. But I just wonder, and I don't want to say I worry, but I do wonder what's going to happen. How do we vote and say, all right, no matter what, we're going to be one nation? I just want to make one more point and then I'll hush, I promise.
Oh, no, keep going.
Keep
I was
going.
working at a nonprofit a couple of years ago, and a friend of mine, a pastor, I got a good man on top of that. He got pastor. We were just talking one day at a break or something. He said, well, I'm on the presidential prayer team. And I said, that's good, man. How long have you been on it? Since President Trump was elected. And I said, oh, was there not a presidential prayer team the last 8 years under President Obama? He said, why would I want to be on that? I said, oh, you want to be on the Trump prayer team? No, I don't care how you vote, who you support. That's not what I'm saying. But we need to get past this. As Christians, we're the Republican Party. As Christians, we're the Democratic Party. As Christians, we're the Green Party. As Christians, we need to be Christians.
Yes.
I've been so bothered by the way the public national evangelicals, and I will not name names, how they have embraced these politicians who've made no effort or even given lip service to being a Christian, but they sure want the Christians' support and money. And look, I understand that that's politics. But as Christians, are we not supposed to be more discerning than saying, we want political status, we're going to endorse you?
Yeah.
I want God's will, even if it's not my will. And those are hard words to say. And I don't know what God's will for our nation is. I know what I feel
Mhm.
I know I kind of went off on a rabbit trail. I don't mean
No,
No,
we always
you're-
go on rabbit trails.
Yes.
We live on them.
We make our living on the rabbit trail.
true. I do that a lot of Sundays.
And so I agree. I too am worried that we are so divided that we're not going to be able to come together. And I, Phil talks about another election back in the 1800s that we were very divided on, and it was months later, and there was a backroom deal about the federal troops, and I had forgotten that. And I think, how are we still suffering because of that backhanded deal?
Yep.
Right? Like, it was a short-term solution that created a long-term problem.
The Great Compromise.
The Great Compromise. And I have high hopes that this can be resolved, but I'm really starting to wonder. And I am not a sky is falling kind of person, but I'm just watching the people that I know, and I have family members this way, that if you don't believe, I was laughing with my grandmother because I don't necessarily agree. So now my whole family are going to know how. So I guess I kind of just came out of the closet. Wait. Ugh. But anyway,
I think it's a different topic, a different episode.
Maybe I won't share this one as much.
We can edit anything you need me to edit.
But anyway, it's that, and they're saying, and what I want to say to them that I haven't had the guts to say yet is, when you are saying these terrible, ugly things about the way this person may be voting, you are talking about someone that you say that you love.
Right.
And that we have lived life together for many, many years, and I think we're forgetting that, because we think when we just that tending to think that everybody that we know agrees with us, kind of thing.
Yep.
And we're creating wounds that are going to be deep and are going to take a while to heal.
That's such a pet peeve of mine, because I've seen so many people that I love and I care about post things that are targeted to specific people.
Yes.
And in their mind, they are probably seeing, something that looks like Satan when they're talking about them.
Right.
But the real, like the application, when you apply what they are saying, you're hitting me. Like, you are actually hitting me in your family member, your friend. And so, I try to fight back on that, even when I'm hearing people who have the same political ideology as myself do that, because both sides are doing it big time.
Yeah.
I try to fight back on that, because I do not. I hate feeling that way, that I'm not cared about, that my voice doesn't matter, that I'm actually an enemy. So I don't want to do it myself, and I don't want people that I care about to do it. So I try my best to fight back on that you should not be throwing around, these type of negative things. Especially when it's just so evil. Really, you're making these people out to be just evil people, and they're not. I think a lot of people. I don't know. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole this time, honestly. So I'm not going to.
I feel like, so I have not been an apolitical party person my whole life. I have voted crazy. For Pete's sakes, I even voted for Ross Perot.
Nice.
So I've been all over. I've voted red, I've voted blue, whatever Ross Perot was, who knows? And so I think, I staunchly put myself kind of in that moderate position. And I have people from both sides that I care deeply about. And it is painful for me to watch us do this to each other. It's just.
Yeah.
So I'm going to not use my own answer, but almost summarize part of what Skye's book that's kind of from a few years ago, The Voting Booth. I did read that before we talked here, and a lot of what you're saying kind of ties into what he had talked about. So I'm going to summarize what's basically already a short 60-page book, but he gives what strategies for Christians when they're deciding to vote. And one is, or how to engage in public life. One strategy is the exodus strategy. We have to pull out of where we are. We can't involve ourselves in public life. The culture's too broke. We have to get away from this. One strategy is the exile strategy, that we're living in exile. We're in a corrupt nation, but we can still try to make it better. And so like we have to win through political power and imposing our will upon the people that we're in. And he said, like he mentions, these are named after things in Scripture. So there's examples of these in Scripture. You can see the Exodus from Egypt. You can see the exile of like Esther and Daniel kind of influencing the cultures that they're in. So Christians can honestly look at these and see ways that the scriptural backing for them. He said, but the problem and the way we should be approaching it is that if we're looking at those as the actual strategy and not like as a single instance of a larger strategy, that they're really strategies of fear, because we're seeing ourselves as under attack. We're seeing ourselves as we have to defend ourselves some way. We have to get out of this mess we're in, or we have to take over and make this mess better. But that's not what he calls the spirit of incarnation. The idea of we need to live like Jesus lived. We need to be self-sacrificial and have no fear even when we're under attack, which I think is a pretty interesting way to put it. It doesn't actually tell us anything about how we're supposed to vote. Like, obviously we should take our Christian ideals, looking at things like, dignity of the human person, other people, that when we're going to vote. But if you look at it as if like the idea that we're all going to be overtaken and, this country's going to completely fall apart. Well, maybe it will. Maybe there's nothing we can do, but there's always something God can do. And if we look at it that way, that we don't have that fear of going in, that we have to protect ourselves. We have to be defensive going in there. We have to attack people who vote differently than us. That's pretty game changing. And I like that.
I like that too.
It's called the voting booth.
The voting booth.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look that up.
It's like, what, 70 pages?
It really is 70 pages, and it's wrote like a play. So it's super quick to read.
Yeah. Yeah, I read probably half of it when it first came out, quite a few years ago, and then I didn't read all of it, and I haven't got around to reading it, so I really need to. But Skye is great. I've learned so much from him. So I guess to summarize, let's try to give our Christian brethren that's listening and watching this a summary. When we go to the voting booth, if we haven't already, which I have. But if we haven't already, and we're going next Tuesday, what is the one thing? Let's make it a single issue, even though we said we shouldn't do that. Let's make it a single issue that we should keep in mind as a Christian going in on how to cast our vote. And Nate, do you want to start it?
I would encourage people to remember that the other side of the aisle, whichever side you're on, those people are not your enemies. It's like if I root for the West Virginia Mountaineers in college football, and
I'm sorry,
Virginia Tech Hokies, we are not enemies. We are not enemies. We have different opinions. We have different things we think are important. Just for an example, those people are not our enemies. We just have differences of opinion. And honestly, the country is at its strongest when there are differences of opinion and we come to a common ground. Just like your church. In a church board meeting, a difference of opinion is healthy as long as you come to a common ground. That's what I would encourage people to remember. Those people, they're not against you. You don't take it personal. I don't.
Agreed. Brooke?
I think for me, the thing that I want to keep in mind when I go in the booth and I encourage others is that it's not about making myself better, but it's about making other people better. And
Right.
Sometimes that means that it's something that's not going to benefit me. But, and I think that as a Christian, that's one of our main things that we have to keep in mind is that it's not all about me. It's about you all, and it's about our society and our culture. And so
It's such a serving attitude.
Yeah.
An attitude of serving, not a self-serving attitude.
Yeah.
So that's for me. That's what it is.
So for myself, I would say to be self-sacrificial. I've always tried to have political leanings or support political policies based on not what's beneficial to me personally, but who is being oppressed in this country, who are the minorities in this country, what are their problems, and what is the best policies that I think. And again, there's going to be two sides to how you deal with any policy, any problem, but what do I think is the best outcome for that? And what's the best outcome for the earth in general? Because as Christians, we have a call to care for this planet that we're on, that we were given. So I guess to summarize, I'm a majority voter. I've always been a majority voter, and I think I'm just logically always going to be. Whatever the majority of things that I believe in policy wise, that's the political party I'm going to support. And even, and I really have a hard time weighing one issue. I think my top issue is healthcare. It has been for many years. And that does hit me a little bit more personal. Maybe that's why maybe that is why I'm more affected by it or more persuaded by it. But even if healthcare wasn't there, there's a bucket list of things that I think the country needs to do, and I'm going to be a majority voter. So, I would say encourage people to look into that and think about being more of a majority voter than a single issue voter. That would be my one thing. Bowling.
So I'm going to completely contradict you. No, I'm just kidding. But it's going to sound like it, but it doesn't. It really isn't. I would say that remember that nobody is a single issue voter in theory. Everybody weights things a different way, though. So like maybe somebody's weight on something like abortion is so much higher than somebody else. It essentially winds up being that. But when you're voting, remember that other people might weight it differently too. And so like I think if you come in with that attitude of, if you come in with an attitude of being hopeful and an attitude of viewing the human dignity of people, everybody else that you're voting for, that is how you're going to weight your issues. And those issues that are dealing with the human dignity, I will get it out eventually, but of others, I think that's how you should approach it. Yeah.
Great. And I think in general, just get out and vote. That's probably for America. That's the most important thing this year. Everyone needs to get out and vote, period. All right. Well, that was fun. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I liked it.
All right. So we are going to now segue. Appalachian Liturgy Top 5 Debate. Into our top 5. This week we decided, and Nate helped me come up with this, fictional presidents. So presidents from TVs, movies, we are going to rank those. So Nate, you're our guest. You get the honors. Starting us off. Start from number 5.
Well, I tell you what, one thing I did was I went to Google and I typed in fictional presidents because I had a list, and this thing came up with like 45 people, 45 characters. I started looking through it. I didn't know half of them, So it's a popular role to be played. But my number 5, top 5 fictional president is from the movie Dave Kovic, played by Kevin Kline. I think that's a little bit of a cheat though, because when he was playing the president, he actually wasn't the president. So I'm not sure if that one's fair enough. That's my number 5.
Interesting. I haven't seen that.
It's a good movie.
You need
to go watch it.
It's fun. My number 4 is Frank Underwood from House of Cards by Kevin Spacey.
Oh wow!
Not a good guy in any stretch of the imagination, and a villainous character, but man, he was captivating to watch. So you can watch a TV show and root for the villain if you want to.
Yeah, you can.
I mean, you don't have to feel guilty about it. Is what I mean.
I was tossing around the idea of putting him on here because he was captivating for sure.
Oh, no, I'm with you on that, but I still thought it was a good role. Number 3 is the president from Independence Day that Bill Pullman played. Really only because of that speech he gives at the end of the movie.
Absolutely.
Every time I watch Independence Day, I'm ready to go out and fight something.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Number 2 was Harrison Ford's character from Air Force One.
Yep.
That's what you want the idea of your president to be. He wants to negotiate, but he's willing to fight bare knuckled if he has to.
Yeah.
And my number 1, I think my favorite ever portrayal of a president is Martin Sheen in The West Wing as Jed Bartlett. That's fantasy land, let's face it. But man, that show stands up today. I could watch it again tonight. He is my favorite all-time fictional president.
Awesome. All right, I'll go next. My turn. So my number 5 is President Jed Bartlett. And the reason why it's lower on my list is simply because I only watched the first 2, maybe 3 seasons of West Wing. I don't know why I quit, because I really liked it. But I did. Honestly, I think I was watching it during the time I was watching House of Cards, and I was like, House of Cards is way more captivating than this tame thing. So I didn't watch West Wing, but I need to go back and watch it now because it is really good. So that would be my number 5. My number 4 is President Tom Kirkman, and that's from Designated Survivor.
Yes.
And that was a great show, and I wish they had picked it back up for a 4th season because, man, that was such a good show. So my number 3 is President Bruce Greenwood from National Treasure.
Ooh, good one.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I love the National Treasure movies. And even though he doesn't play a huge role in it, I do love the movies, so I figured he would be a good one to have on my list.
Yeah.
So my number 2 is President Alan Trumbull, which is from all the Fallen movies, and it's Morgan Freeman.
Yes.
Yeah. What is it? I'm trying to think of some of the movie titles.
One's Olympus.
Olympus Has Fallen, Angel Has Fallen.
Okay.
All of those.
I had no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
When I said the Fallen movies, I was like, they might not know what I'm talking about, but yeah, it's those. And then my number 1 is President Thomas J. Whitmore, Independence Day.
Yeah.
And that speech is just so amazing that you can't top it, in my opinion. All right, who's next?
All
right. Yeah, I'll do it. I figured we'd have a lot of overlap on a lot of these, but
You and I always have overlap.
my number 5, President Laura Roslin from Battlestar Galactica, because nobody said U.S. presidents, so
Yes. I didn't say, oh my God, yes.
But yeah, great president, great leader.
I completely endorse this. I want it on the final list.
Yeah, I agree.
Number 4, Thomas Whitmore, Independence Day.
Yep.
Nothing needs to be said there. James Marshall, Air Force One. Nothing needs to be said there. Number 2, Selena Meyer from Veep.
Oh yeah.
Oh wow, I still haven't watched that. I need
So
to.
yeah, my top 2 are mostly comedy ones, but that's because that's what I love the most. But which is a hint for number 1, President Camacho, Terry Crews in Idiocracy. He's great, and he's actually a good president. He listens to advice from other people and does what his experts tell him to do. Stops feeding plants Brondo.
All right. So my number 5 was Elizabeth McCord from Madam Secretary.
Oh wow.
President.
Okay.
Aaron just texted me from the basement and said Kevin Kline, Dave, but he doesn't get a vote. So my number 4 was Andrew Shepard. Michael Douglas from The American President.
Okay.
Ooh.
And then 3 was Thomas Whitmore with Independence Day, Bill Pullman. 2 was President Beck in Deep Impact.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
And then my number 1 was James Marshall, Air Force One, Harrison Ford.
Very nice. Well, we do have quite a few overlaps, and so I think number 5. So one of the spots needs to go to Battlestar Galactica.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah. So what was the name there, Bowling, for that?
Laura Roslin.
Laura Roslin. So that's definitely a spot. So we have 4 spots open. What's the overlap that we have?
I think everybody had Thomas Whitmore, so that has to be on the list.
Okay, so Thomas Whitmore.
James Marshall was on quite a few
He's
lists.
at least 3.
Yeah.
hmm
James Marshall. Okay.
And I think I had. So I'm actually surprised. For my honorable mentions, I had Jed Bartlett, which I didn't make my list, but I felt like I had to mention him. But nobody else mentioned David Palmer, who I had my honorable mentions from 24, which I thought would make somebody's list as
I
well.
didn't watch 24. I didn't.
Oh,
I
But-
forgot about 24.
I did too. I watched some of it, but I forgot.
but yeah, I think the West Wing one has to. I think that was on everybody's but mine, wasn't it?
He wasn't on mine.
Okay, never mind.
Well, it was on 2 of our.
But it was
So
on
y'all,
2. And it's
you
a
all
really
didn't
good
like
one.
West Wing, or just not enough to make a
Oh, I
top
did.
5?
It just wasn't in my top 5.
I think West Wing came out when my kids were really little, and I have a TV void from when my children were really
Okay.
small. So I need to go back and watch it.
It's still worth watching, in my opinion.
Mhm.
I didn't
Mhm.
watch it till college, but then I had a friend who she loved it, and like all of us just kind of binged the whole thing.
All right, we're at 4. We need one more.
Ooh. So we need number 5, or what do we?
Yeah, we need one more on our list.
One more.
Well, we had Morgan Freeman in Deep Impact and Morgan Freeman in the.
Oh, let's just say Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman, President Morgan Freeman.
President Morgan Freeman. All right.
I mean, is there a list that Morgan Freeman couldn't be on somewhere? I mean,
That's true. He did play God. So
Yeah.
that's impressive too. All right, so our number 1 is Morgan Freeman. All right. Then we have let's say our number 2 is Whitmore.
Yeah, that's fine.
Our number 3 would be James Marshall.
Yeah.
Our number 4 would be Bartlett, and our number 5 would be Laura Roslin.
That's
I
recommended.
can live with it.
Everybody.
That's a good list. That is a good list. I like it.
makes me want to go watch some of these movies now.
I know,
Yeah.
right? We can binge watch movies with popular presidents. You know what? I had an honorable mention, and I was going to cheat. It was going to be on my list, and I was like, you know what? That's cheating. It was going to be Abraham Lincoln, but it was from Lincoln, like the Lincoln vampire movie.
Oh,
I knew that's what you were going to say as soon as you started your sentence somehow.
Yeah. But then I was like, you know what? That's too cheesy. I hated that movie, by the way.
for
It's
folks
not
who are
worth-
just listening, I rolled my eyes really hard. So verbally, that doesn't come across.
I used to teach a shoplifting diversion class at this nonprofit I worked at. And I went in to start the class one Monday morning, and the guy was sitting there reading a book. And I said, "What are you reading?" He said, "I'm reading this little known biography of Abraham Lincoln." I said, "Oh, really? What's it called?" And he goes, "Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter." And I looked at him, and I know the look said, "You are too dumb to live." He was like, "Yeah, man, it's a true story." And I said,
Oh, wow.
"We're gonna be here a while today."
Oh goodness, that is awful.
That's amazing.
That's funny. All right. Well, Nate, thank you so much.
you, guys.
Thank you for being a lifelong fan of our show, and thank you for your work in ministry and for being a guest. It's a lot of fun.
I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed meeting all you guys.
Yeah, and we will definitely have you back at some point. But I guess the final conclusion, just please pray for our nation
Absolutely.
Go vote.
and go vote.
Yes.
That's all we can do at this point. So peace be with you and good night.